Hello and welcome to this panel discussion about innovation in a time of national crisis, brought to you by Manufacturing TV and Innovate UK. The onset of the pandemic in 2020 put UK manufacturing under enormous pressure. For some companies, order books simply collapsed, or production chaos grew when parts didn't show up thanks to broken supply chains. For others, there was a massive strain on their capacity as they pivoted towards or rapidly ramped up production of PPE. Now, a lot was achieved by manufacturers helping each other to overcome some of these challenges. But the story that hasn't been told widely enough is that much of the sector's positive response to COVID couldn't have happened without the guidance, funding and support of government agencies such as Innovate UK. Today, we're going to hear from several manufacturers about how Innovate UK's support worked for them. We'll hear from Innovate UK's Chief Business Officer, Simon Edmonds, about how the agency moved so quickly to respond to these challenges. And perhaps most importantly, we'll look ahead to identify how the same systems that responded so well in a crisis can work for manufacturers in the future as we finally appear to be emerging from the pandemic. So let's get cracking with the introductions. Anthony Burns is COO of ACS Clothing. Phil Miles is a monitoring officer with Innovate UK. Simon King is CEO of Radical Fibres. Robin Haycock is CEO of Fernhay, and as I've mentioned, Simon Edmonds is Chief Business Officer at Innovate UK. Simon, let's start with you. Give us a sense, please, of the atmosphere at Innovate UK when the government decided it had to ramp up support for industry during lockdown.
Thanks, Nick. So right at the start of the pandemic, what a time ago. Well, firstly, none of us could see each other. We were like every other business. We were all sitting in our various dining rooms, offices, spare rooms, bedrooms, whatever you like any other business. So the first things we were trying to do is, can we operate remotely as Innovate UK? It's important that we pay people their grants, that we can pay people. And we quickly found out that our systems were good enough, and we quickly tested our systems. And then, of course, the formal work from home guidance came. We all had to follow. It was clear that it was going to have a massive impact on the portfolio of companies that we have at present, and also the sort of wider group of companies that follow us. So what we were going to do was, everybody was speculating, I have to say at the outset, would people completely cut R&D straight away? Would they just forget about it, put it to one side, conserve cash, but batten down the hatches? And we thought, well, that could be a reaction, but let's see whether we could put our heads together and see if there's an alternative way. And remotely put a plan together for both existing grant holders, because what we didn't want to lose is everybody who's got a grant with us suddenly going to be affected by supply chain issues, working from home, not being able to get to the lab, not being able to get to the work, not being able to travel. So we wanted to keep all of our existing grants live. So that's the first thing. We wanted people to continue a lot of things. And then, in very quick order, we were hearing about PPE, ventilators, things that we were getting involved with in supply chain issues, using our networks. And we thought, let's give innovators that are here and today the opportunity to contribute to the pandemic. So we came up with a big fast start competition, which was completely new to us, and literally put it up within about 4 weeks from a standing start. And it was one of our most successful competitions because we turned the competition process a bit on its head. We decided people are going to need cash, because we were already hearing this from our Innovate Edge service. People were worried about cash. So if we're going to have a COVID response fast start competition, we're going to need to give people the money probably up front. And we want them to be very short projects, 6 months, And we had a massive response, over 8,000 applicants, 800 projects got through that process, and 4 of them are here to talk about what they did as part of that. And then following that, we were continuing with existing grant holders, giving them leeway, giving them flexibility. We opened up a loan competition, but I think one of the lessons we learned was there was so much lending going on in the COVID space that innovation loans weren't the thing that were needed, and we further stood up a big sustainable innovation fund. But the Fast Start competition was all about, can you do something in response to the pandemic? Can you do it quickly in 6 months? And we'll give you the cash up front to do it.
It's quite a remarkable exercise at any level. I think looking back at that period, obviously we all focus on the ventilator challenge because what Dick Elsey at the HVM Catapult and loads of companies and collaborators, including Innovate UK, managed to pull off in such a short time at distance was absolutely incredible. Let's talk about the companies we've got here today. I'm going to turn to Simon King first of all. Simon, what did Radical Fibers come up with? What was your specific challenge that you wanted help from Innovate UK to achieve?
Well, we're a nanofiber company. We design and manufacture nanofibrous materials. While they have a wealth of applications that you can use, the obvious one, especially during a pandemic, is for advanced filtration. Compared to your melt spun conventional filters that you'd see in your classic blue surgical masks, we can filter down to 10 nanometers without too much fuss, which will capture viruses as small as 50 nanometers, which does encompass the COVID-19 pathogen. The reason I reached out to Innovate UK is because we just needed help getting over that barrier. So we had the product, and we just needed, we had an opportunity really, or a golden opportunity to take the product and elevate it beyond where it was. So yes, we could make masks, yes, we could make filters, fine. But one of the things that was constantly coming out in the news time and time again was that tons and tons and tons of PPE was ending up in landfill. And we knew that we were this close from making it 100% biodegradable. So that's why we reached out to the Sustainable Innovation Fund.
So Simon, the fact of the matter is that you've developed a product actually which is going to save what is purported to be a real disaster after the pandemic, which is just the amount of masks that are being cast aside and don't degrade.
Yep. I mean, our PPE as it stands at the moment, especially when it's, you think about your polyethylene aprons that just, rip them off and throw them in the bin. They could be around for hundreds of years, if maybe forever. The science doesn't really have a definitive answer because, the research hasn't been going on for 400 years. So who knows? So, to make the leap now, to get the technology right now, to make sure it is gone within a generation, it is the best thing to do for everybody. If one of our masks does end up in the sea, and a fish and say sea turtle eats it, or some of the horror stories you hear about, it's fully, it will dissolve in the stomach acid, and the animal is fully palatable. It's not an issue whatsoever.
Well, that is a remarkable achievement. Thank you. Can I turn to Robin Haycock at Fernhay? Robin, tell us what Fernhay does and what help you are seeking from Innovate UK.
Thank you. So Fernhay makes cycling and walking equipment to deliver parcels, and as I think we all recognised in the pandemic, our parcel deliveries rather accelerated, and quite a lot of the delivery drivers became essential workers within that time frame. So when you start looking at a significant move towards e-commerce, and then when you break that down, instead of it being business to shops, it became business direct to the customer's doors, delivering things like toilet papers, if we all remember that one. You start to look at how do you do that sustainably. And actually, 95% of all deliveries are done by diesel van. And we are actually actively working with customers to move them away from vans and into cycling and walking logistics. The problem we face is that that's not very scalable, and what we've been working on is how you make that scalable. We do that by a very large box on the back of whatever we put it on, cyclist or walking, and that big box weighs, when it's full of parcels, about 250 kilos. So before the pandemic, you would handle that with 2 people, and we eventually had to solve a problem of how you handle that with 1 person. So we carried on innovating, and we accelerated our innovation cycle. But because of where we were, we needed to seek support and funding. We've worked with Innovate for a while now, and they came and stood by the plate, and we got the funding to develop that system.
And I'm assuming from this that you actually did succeed in innovating a new way for your product to be operated by just 1 person.
Yes, we did. So that was all to do with the mechanization of moving those boxes from a depot, preloading them, putting them either in the back of a van for bulk transfer down to town, moving them from a transporter onto a cycle or walker. All of that is detail analysis and then detailed design and innovation on how you do that safely and with 1 person. And we have achieved that now. Yeah, it's great.
Well, that's remarkable. Anthony, at ACS Clothing, what happened in your business when the pandemic struck?
Well, Nick, ACS, we're Europe's largest clothing rental and clothing resale fulfillment centre. We facilitate circular business models like clothing rental and clothing resale. And these models, they're inherently sustainable, but we're trying to deliver them in a sustainable way, which will accelerate the adoption of these models. Now, traditionally, the ACS business has been predicated on renting menswear for black tie events and weddings. So when the pandemic struck, there were no weddings, there were no black tie events. So our business, our order book fell off a cliff. So we were keen to continue to grow things. And the biggest barrier to the adoption of circular business models of clothing rental and resale and second-hand clothing is a perception that these clothes are dirty. So we have been working on some new sanitization technology. Now, we've been using ozone technology for many years, but it's very much, we use it in a batch process. We have designed a new chamber, which is a combination of ozone and UV, and it's automated and it's an inline process. And we have also designed laundry systems that utilize ozone in the water. So with the help of Innovate UK, we have managed to progress all of these projects and also work on developing the business as a whole and growing other streams which aren't all based on menswear rental. So it's been very successful, and with the help of Innovate UK, we've managed to continue doing these things.
I should say that anybody watching this, if you go to YouTube and search for Innovate UK, everybody has recorded their stories on YouTube videos, and you'll get a lot more detail about how it actually worked and the developments and innovations that were made. The classic one from ACS that Anthony's just described. What I want to pick up on a little later, Anthony, if I may, is the fact that a vacuum appeared in your business, but instead of doing nothing and trying to sweat it out, you actually decided to use that time and opportunity to move forward, to take a leap forward into the future. And I think that that is a very significant factor in a lot of these stories. AeroCare, where Phil Miles is. Now, Phil, I know that you're here as somebody who was a monitoring officer for Innovate UK, but AeroCare itself actually developed an entire new business stream as a result of Innovate UK help during the pandemic, didn't it?
Yes, that's right. The initial call, the portfolio of projects that I was under seemed similar to Anthony, although his wasn't in it, was about sanitisation, which fell into ozone, UV, mostly far UV, which was AeroCare's, and ozone, and hypochlorous acid as a replacement for bleach. So AeroCare in particular developed far UV initially for the sanitisation of the back of ambulances, but like other projects, they then quickly started to look ahead to how to get the economy and people moving again once we came out of lockdown. In their case, it's for sanitisation of the inside of aircraft and for passengers by stepping through a booth as they would board an aircraft. But then obviously that has implications for going into schools or hospitals or other buildings. Also within the portfolio, there was another company who developed a method of checking sanitisation, and those two work together, and by the end of the project they're collaborating to A, sanitise, and B, check the standard of sanitisation on board aircraft, because they were in the same industry.
So in effect, what we saw was an acceleration of technologies that were obviously beneficial and but not regarded perhaps as vital as they suddenly became when the pandemic struck. It's that accelerating nature of the funding that I find interesting. Simon Edmonds, if I can come back to you on this. You've been listening to these stories, and of course you know them intimately because you've worked with these companies for such a long time. But is it fair to say that it is that it's not just support as such, it is actually that acceleration of technologies that are beneficial, not just to the companies and their supply chains, but also to society?
Yes, there was a lot more. There was a lot more support that we were giving, and also what we are doing is pivoting for these businesses for good, but also providing an impact for a response to a post-pandemic world. So, you know, in Robin's case, how many people are now ordering food and having things delivered in a way not seen probably pre-pandemic? I don't know what the answer is, but I suspect it's an awful lot. And I imagine it's a scale of difference, the amount of things that we're having delivered to our houses than we've ever had delivered in our lives before.
So we saw quite a lot of analysis done by our customers, and there were quite a few mega trends that came across that are now continuing. Business to business, i.e. supplying to the shops and businesses within a city fell like a stone, so it did have a significant impact. But that super rise of e-commerce to a door changed the dynamic. So actually the van became, so our customers had to pivot a bit more than perhaps we did. We happened to be reasonably in the right place at the right time, I suppose, in a funny, ironic way. But you start looking at the analysis of cities, and you see that cities are very much different. So the ones that were monoculture, which was just a shopping experience, suffered more than, say, the Oxfords and Cambridges of the world, which had a very diverse array of things that you would do in a city centre. So I think those are the sorts of things that also had to reinvent how a city worked.
Fascinating. Yeah, I'm wondering if Simon Edmonds, if you could perhaps just give us a sense of the scale financially of the amount of money that you had available for supporting these companies.
So we had allocated 50 million for this. So it was literally up to £50,000 per company. And it was part of a wider package. So 50 million for this very fast start response, quick projects that the four companies got involved with, and really helping them out of, you know, their existing situation. In total, the package was around 750 million that we secured from Treasury over a couple of years. And this included all the continuity grants that we were doing, so the flexibilities that would be needed, because we're conscious that supply chains were crumbling and people would not be able to get their raw materials for projects, particularly in a manufacturing field. And normal supply chains would be disrupted. It included new competitions, the Sustainable Innovation Fund. It included expanding our EDGE service, which is our business growth service. This is a business support advisory system that we have for innovation, where we are actively looking at scaling up the number of businesses that we have, helping them to scale. And what we did in the pandemic was scale the number of advisors that we had across the UK, providing initially a lot of help and stability support for SMEs, particularly, to try and point them to the right place of all the support that was out there.
I'd like to get a sense from some of the manufacturers here about the actual process that you went through. Robin Haycock, I know that at Fernhay, in the video you put out, you mentioned that there was a tremendous amount of support you received. This wasn't just cash.
No, we've always... So I guess people first off look towards Innovate for cash, and we're no different in that respect. However, the majority, I mean, clearly the cash helps, but the majority of our benefit we really see from Innovate has always been collaboration. So you put us in touch essentially for a partnership with UPS, and they're one of our biggest customers, and they've helped us to develop the product. So that's one. I strangely find the 10 questions, as I now call them, remarkably good at deciding whether I should do an innovation application or even an innovation on its own, whether I apply for Innovate or not. The 10 questions that are the bane of our lives sometimes actually force you to question whether you should be doing that piece of innovation. So that is great. I mean, the work that Simon's talking about through the pandemic, I found it remarkable that you stepped up quite so fast and dynamically to the problems that we were facing. And yeah, it was great to work with Innovate.
Stories from anybody else? Anthony at ACS Clothing. What happened as far as you were concerned? Because you really were, as you said earlier, business fell off a cliff. To what extent did Innovate UK give you more than just cash?
Well, as you say, business did fall off a cliff, but it allowed us as an exec team to take a step back and look at where the business was going, look at our existing business streams. And we reached out to a US company. And in the US, clothing rental is a lot more mature than it is in the UK. It's partly because in the UK, we have a culture of ownership rather than usership, predicated in the fact many of us own our own homes. But we lease so many things, from music to beds, hotel rooms, and it's changing. So we reached out to a US company, and they facilitate clothing rental for big brands and retailers in the US. And they came to the UK, and they're using ACS as their fulfillment centre. So that we had the time and the support to realise that. And that was partly done because we have also 2 KTPs in conjunction with Innovate UK. One of them is a technical KTP that's to deliver a technical project. And another is around growing circular business models like clothing rental and clothing resale. So the support we've had from academia and Innovate UK via the KTP has accelerated what we're trying to do and has really created a step change from where we were pre-pandemic to where we are now.
Simon King, can I ask you the same question about the assistance and input from Innovate UK over and above cash?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that came up earlier was Innovate Edge. That is something we have been utilising quite a lot. And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's sort of like post-project assistant. So that after we've developed the product, after we're ready to take it to market, it's talking to those business experts and getting the advice on what steps we should be taking, how we should be taking this forward. We're probably the youngest company on this call. We're only 2 years old, and we were actually created 2 weeks after the first lockdown hit. Terrible timing on my part, but I didn't really. It's one of those things. But having access to something like Innovate Edge, which, as someone else said, yes, cash is king, but just having someone you can pick up the phone and say, well, I've been approached by somebody who wants me to go down this route, but are you familiar with it? Do you understand it? What can you recommend? And 9 times out of 10, they won't have the answer, but what they do have is the contact list to get you in contact with somebody who does have the answer. And that has been crucial.
Phil Miles, you're a monitoring officer at Innovate UK. Perhaps you could tell us what a monitoring officer does and give us some first-hand experience of what it was like dealing with the companies who were being helped by Innovate UK?
I'm the first point of contact with, in this case, a portfolio initially of about 15 projects, which went on top of my existing portfolio of 20 or so, rapidly expanding to over 50 when the sustainable innovation competitions kicked in. And I think it was the speed and the volume that was most notable. And the diversity of applications. We started with COVID-specific ones, as I said, mostly in sanitisation, but then it expanded to everything from haptic robots to genetically engineered maggots, as well as helping I normally work in the aerospace stream, and as Simon said, that was one of the hardest hit sectors and still is, with many of them making their projects run long and thin as insertion points for new technology went back, so we had to support them at the same time.
Simon Edmonds, I'm intrigued by what the experience of the last 2 years tells us about the framework for government support for industry in the UK, and what lessons you've learned as Chief Business Officer at Innovate UK about how this can work better and more streamlined in the future.
So a lot of lessons for us as Innovate UK. We've been through quite a lessons process, and actually we're still documenting that because we're still in the second year of a COVID response. So we're still documenting what we found out about this. I mean, we got to find out that there was a way of working that we were not used to, and we adapted to a different way of working. Lots of people were doing things that they didn't normally do because we were in the middle of a crisis, as everybody was. So as a remote operation, we learned quite quickly how to do things at pace, how to get teams together. People met sort of 3 times a week as a sort of coordination group. And they were, literally knocking over barriers as they saw them. So we've had people doing things that normally they wouldn't be doing, supporting each other. And so we've learned a lot of things about the strengths and weaknesses of our own organisation. And I think in terms of the support we give, the Fast Start competition was completely new. We'd not done this before, the £50,000 upfront. So we had to develop some really robust due diligence processes and have those in place very quickly. So that startup system is something that we're looking to use. That Fast Start system, is something that we're looking to use as we go forward.
I'm just wondering, Simon, if the feedback that you give government, you must obviously have to report back how everything's going. I assume that they must have been very impressed by the way you guys operated.
Yes, I think ministers were impressed, and we've constantly been updating and documenting what we did in the process. I know our incoming CEO, Indra Mukherjee, when he joined last May, had clearly seen the impact of this COVID response work. So we've featured it a lot with our ministers. There's a lot of case studies. We've got a YouTube channel dedicated to the people that we've supported, including everybody here today. So, yes, there's a lot that we have been talking to government about, and they've been responding really positively. There have been a number of visits to a number of the Fast Start places. So, yes, it was good.
I'd like to turn to some of the manufacturers. Put your hand up, please. If this resonates with you, the fact that the pandemic, tragic and awful though it has been for families, individuals, and of course it's been a blow to the country's economy as well, but whether it's actually changed the way you've done business. Who'd like to answer that?
Yes, Nick, I think it certainly has. From our perspective, what the pandemic's done in many ways, it has changed how brands, retailers and consumers all think about sustainability. And that is supporting what we do because we facilitate circular business models that are more sustainable. And there's been a a real step change, a move from a linear approach to a more circular approach. And we think that is prevalent across many industries, but certainly very much so with the fashion industry. And we're currently well set up to support the change that's happening.
Simon King, does that resonate with you? Because it's interesting that COP26 focused our minds tremendously in quite a long lead up to it on the issue of net zero. And of course, given the pandemic, this sort of the confluence of the two things, you must be in a perfect position to be able to capitalize on that.
In a way, yes. One of the things we still struggle with today, though, is access to local manufacturing and local materials supply. Throughout the pandemic, because we created this company during the pandemic, to go back to your previous question, we didn't really change our business because we were built to accommodate it. We grew with it. But one of the things I tried to do was, to try and minimize, the strain on the environment, to keep sustainability high, was to just kind of look for local partners to work with, look for local material suppliers, and they just weren't there. We still, to this day, have to import majority of the stuff that we use.
Okay, Robin Haycock. I mean, obviously, as you were saying earlier, Fernhay is dedicated anyway to making cities and the way we live and operate cleaner. Did you find it that this accelerated your innovation, the fact that the net zero drive was happening at the same time as the pandemic was going on?
Yeah, we do. I've been involved with the electric vehicle market for a long while, and that's why we ended up spinning out the company Fernhay to do this kind of work. We were at COP26 with UPS, supporting them with our products and their journey to net zero. As I said before, it's very much influenced by the way that we're now having parcels delivered and how our cities are starting to shape up as well now. With people really moving towards a 15-minute city type environment, that's changing a lot of things, sustainability, road to zero, all of these kinds of things. I'd like to go back to Simon's point, I suppose, because of the work we've really done on innovation and the scrutiny that we've had through going through competitions with Innovate, that has helped us tremendously in getting what we're now very, very late stage into an investment that will happen to us in the next few weeks. And that is probably, I put a lot of that down to the rigor that we have had when we've been assessed, and then going through that assessment process and being able to say to investors, this is, we won competitions and we were supported by Innovate.
Phil Miles, I wonder if I can turn to you as somebody who's working on a handful, more than a handful of projects during the competition. Give us some feedback about the mindset of the people you were working with. Did you find they were becoming more open to collaboration, more open to ideas because of the pressures they were under, necessarily?
Yeah, all of that. I think most of them, the ones I saw, certainly arrived. And I think Simon Edmonds' point about getting the fast start going, because most of these guys were raring to go, either with new ideas or adaptations of existing ones, expanding the use of existing products and seeing the application to help with pandemic. Hypochlorous acid is one that was very, there are quite a lot of companies using it, and it's already used in the sanitization of warehouses full of eggs and vegetables. But then working with the universities, that then got the clearances to be able to use it with people, or with ozone. A low level of ozone can kill 80% of airborne pathogens, which previously people would have said, no, don't go near ozone. So yes, there was a keenness and eagerness to work, and also a greater degree of risk taking, both by Innovate UK and by the participants.
Simon Edmonds, we're coming towards the end of our time, but perhaps we can talk about the something we haven't really discussed much during the course of this, which is the bridging element between academia and business that yourselves and other agencies like the Catapults perform so well. Academia obviously came to the fore massively when it came to the vaccines. But tell us about your experience with how they responded during the pandemic and how you were able, if at all, to sort of narrow the gap between academia and business during this time.
So academia, again, a sector massively impacted by the pandemic and, yes, had to set up its working practices. You mentioned, obviously, the vaccine and the vaccine program as one of the huge things that we were doing. During the process, we have scaled up the Vaccine Innovation Centre. Also with our catapults, they are doing vaccine development work and are still doing work, both in the UK, both at Braintree and in the Northeast. And a lot of the university centres that are part of the catapult got involved tremendously in the 14,000 ventilators, the ventilator challenge. Producing 14,000 ventilators from a standing start in 14 weeks was huge. So the academic world had a real push on the vaccines part, and there was quite a process within UKRI of supporting academia in its own response to the pandemic.
Simon King, final thoughts about what you'd say to SMEs now that we're coming out of the pandemic, but the experience you had during that time. Would you recommend perhaps that SMEs keep their eyes open for things like competitions and the way that Innovate UK, money as well as advice can help accelerate?
Oh, 100%. Working with Innovate UK, it forces you to really think about what you're doing, because when you put forward a project, you've got a plan in your head, or the company's got a plan in a direction, and they want to take the product or a project or a service. You pitch that to Innovate UK. I think someone mentioned earlier that the level of scrutiny and some when they and the level of detail they have to go through, especially when you're speaking to your monitoring officer or some of the experts at Innovate UK, they ask questions and they guide you to follow a certain mindset and think about things in a way that you probably wouldn't have thought of originally. Fundamentally their job is to make sure that you're successful. But having someone there to just say, "Well, have you thought about this?" And that's great, but what does it mean for this or that, or how is it going to go long term? And what's your marketing streams or distribution channels? Having someone asking those sorts of questions is absolutely crucial, because as a scientist myself, I do often get far too excited about some of the clever science, and I forget that ultimately I'm trying to run a business as well.
Well, Simon, I think it's absolutely brilliant that you've managed to keep your business going when you were starting it 2 weeks into a major pandemic. I think hats off to you for surviving through all of this pandemic. And it can't have been part of your planning for a pandemic, I'm sure. No. So hats off to you for getting through this.
Yeah, so Robin made the point about using the scrutiny of Innovate UK as something to put the business forward, which I've heard several people do that. The fact that it's not just, if you want to then take to the next stage to a bank or to customers, it's not just you that says it's a good idea. It's gone through an Innovate UK competition, which means it's been independently scrutinised. And I think, as Simon said as well, I certainly know one company who said that the risk management and project management aspects that were applied during the project allowed them to go on and win work in the nuclear industry, because they're just giving them a format and a discipline to do it that they didn't have before.
Robin Haycock, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, so I'd go back to the 10 questions, and I think that I would summarise several of the comments are around the 10 questions. 6 of those probably I hate, but they force me into answering questions that as an engineer I struggle with. So that gives you a really rounded view of whether you should be doing a project, irrespective of whether you get a grant. The other one that I think is really interesting is generally you find that Innovate are looking at big drivers of change, so they're scoping around the world and seeing what will happen in society. So if you align with some of those themes, because you want to or because that's what you're doing anyway, you have a reasonable chance that if you succeed doing innovation on one of those topics, you've got a good business chance. Yes, you've got to go and find investment or find it yourself or whatever. But those drivers of change stories and competitions have also helped us. So I would say it's a process for me, and then partnerships as well.
The 10 questions you keep mentioning, I'm sure, are they available? Because I'm sure anybody watching this is going to say, what the heck are these 10 questions? Where can I find them?
Well, no, essentially, if you look at your competitions, they basically frame underneath the same, I call it 10, but essentially I've adopted that within Fernhay. Basically, if I want to do an innovation, I go to Innovate and look at the questions.
In that case, good advice. Go to the Innovate UK website and maybe set yourself up for one of the competitions. Anthony, final thoughts from you?
Well, it's actually touching on a couple of things that you said, Nick, and you also said, Robin. What we have done is helped us realise carbon neutrality during COVID, and although carbon neutral is good, it's very much only a step on the journey to net zero. So the things that we've been doing have had a knock-on positive impact and really helps differentiate us at ACS against our competitors who are much bigger, really large 3PLs, but our USP is doing the things that we do in a very sustainable way. And now we can say everything we do on site is carbon neutral, and we're targeting net zero by next year, 2023, and that's only because of what we've done during the lockdown.
Well, Simon Edmonds, last thoughts from you, listening to all these tributes and good positive stories. You've heard them all before, but it must be very gratifying to be in a position to be the catalyst for so much of this innovation and new business opportunities.
It's, I think as an organisation and the people here today on this panel, go and look at our YouTube channel. You'll see many of the things that we did during the pandemic. You'll see lots of other companies. Our remit here is basically to generate business growth, economic growth. That's our remit. And during the pandemic, that's what we were driven by. And it's through innovation. We are not a bank. Yes, we can lend money, but we're not a bank. We are a grant funder of research and development. We have the catapult centres. We have our Edge service. And we have our knowledge transfer network. All of these things were pivoted to the pandemic and the support they give. Full of great examples. And that's what drives us. So whether you're in the operations team at Innovate UK, the finance team, the sector teams, challenge teams, it's making the difference in these areas that's mattering to the UK. And at the time of the pandemic, it was making sure we came out a bit stronger. So listening to the stories as we have here today, they're brilliant, and I've really enjoyed listening to them.
Well, Simon, thank you very much indeed for being with us, and all of you. Thank you for taking time out to talk about your experiences during the pandemic. Many, many congratulations to all of you for these fantastic projects that you got going in some of the toughest times the country's gone through since Second World War. Just amazing and very encouraging. Thank you again. And thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more about these projects, as we've said, you can read about them on the Innovate UK website, or go to YouTube and the Innovate UK channel and see the videos for yourselves. This has been a Manufacturing TV production. I'm Nick Peters. Thank you for watching, and see you again soon.